Hi, and welcome to the digital job site where the boards are straight, the weather's great, and there really is a board stretcher. This tutorial is a video segment of a blog post at the digital job site blog on findhomebuilding.com that I'm titling Begin with the End in Mind, Shed Layout and Floor Framing. In a previous blog post there that I called A Step Ahead to Build a Shed, I gave an overview of the design of this shed, why it's configured the way it is, and some of the background information. Also invite comments for future blog posts as the topic is developed and showing carpentry aspects of building a shed like this. So let's get started on this, and the goal here, as the title implies, is to talk about framing the floor for this shed. And I'll apologize to viewers for the appearance of the shed. I was watching the video, the screen capture from the first blog post, and in orbiting around, the shed rocks back and forth like this as I manipulate the model. It kind of gave me the feeling of standing on the deck of a ship, and this is the pilot house, and there's Sang on there trying to get his sea legs and not fall over. But that's just the nature of orbiting the model, so I hope that's not too disturbing for viewers. Anyways, I'm going to turn off the fog here, assuming that I choose the right menu there. We'll just take out the fog, and might as well shut off the shadows while we're at it. And then what I'm going to do is bring up the layers menu here, and the model was, I put this model together so that I could turn things on and off and explain the process of actually building the shed rather than focus on the SketchUp aspect of it, although you'll get some information there as well. And something I did to organize these layers is I wanted them in a certain order, logical order for building a shed, and the SketchUp sets these layers in order alphabetically, and it didn't work out with the names of the layers, so I just put these letters A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on alphabetically on the layers so that they would be in somewhat of a progressive order. But I'm going to start at the bottom here and just delete some stuff to clean this up. You can see those elements shutting off as I go up the list here, just peeling back the model. I'm going to go all the way back till we're looking at the floor framing here. And what you're looking at here is a 3/4 inch tongue and groove plywood on 2x6 joists and 4x4 redwood sleepers or a foundation. But to start this process out, I'll turn the subfloor off and look at the floor framing. And you'll see I've got some dimensions hidden in here. I'll explain those in a little bit. But basically, what I wanted to do, because I chose to use the 4x9 sheets of fir siding on this shed, I wanted to make sure that the seams in the siding landed on a stud. So if I let's put the wall framing back, and then the siding. So with those layers in there, if we pivot around and zoom, here's that seasickness effect again. But I'm going to go into this group and then move this siding aside. And in doing that, you can see that the siding seam lands right on a stud on this side. It's just a little cripple stud over this window, but it's the same on the other side of the building. And then on the end of the shed, it's the same. The seam lands over a stud. So, and because the shed is very close to 8 feet square, that stud will kind of end up there anyways. without a lot of special effort. But the principle is, if you were building a shed that was 10 feet by 14 feet or something like that, you're going to, and planning on using the plywood siding, it's a good idea to do your regular 16-inch or 24-inch on center stud layout so that a siding seam lands on a stud. And if you're doing this, the reason for using this plywood siding is so it didn't have to have a sheathing layer underneath siding like you'd need to do on lap siding with trim corners or something. So anyways, that's the begin with the end in mind principle. I'm basing the layout of my floor joist on how the siding's going to lay out later on in the process. So we'll shut these back off and talk about joist layout. And typical layouts for walls and floors are 12-inch on center, 16 or 24 with engineered wood. A 19.2-inch on center layout comes into play, but the basic principle of that is that I'm taking the tape measure tool here, and I'll just click on a joist, and this is showing 1'4". I'm going to go up here and change the model info to fractional. That'll give us inches so that you can see that this is 16-inch layout, 16 inches from edge to edge of those, and it's also, if we zoom in, go on the center, from center to center, and let's see, that's acting a little funny there because it's trying to get a point. So I can go midpoint in component to midpoint in component. Yeah, this tape measure is acting flaky here, but when the joists are laid out 16 inches apart from edge to edge, then the centers are also 16 inches apart. The reason I'm bringing this up is to achieve that layout, starting at the end of a wall or a floor in this case, the distance from the first joist to the second one isn't 16 inches, it's 15 1/4. That's because we're going from an edge to a center, and there's a 3/4 inch difference. So from the end to the first joist is 16 inches, and then from there to there, each subsequent joist is 16 inches apart. Now it finally clicked to the center. And the purpose for all this is that, again, beginning with the end in mind, we want to make sure that the flooring lands on a joist. And I'll turn that flooring layer back on. And in this case, the plywood's 8 feet long. It doesn't end up being an issue whether those joists are actually accurately laid out on center. But if you were building a structure that was, say, 15 feet long, then I'm just going to move this over 32 inches and then zoom in, and you can see that now is breaking on a joist. And if you had if you were building a floor of this shape, then you'd have a 32-inch fill here and a 32-inch fill on this corner over here. But the main point being that the plywood end seams would land on a joist. And those are the things that are important to consider when you're working through the initial layout of the shed. If you just make the joist work out for the plywood, or you measure 16 inches from the end instead of 15 1/4 to the edge of the first joist, then at some point you're going to have a little 3/4 inch rip of plywood, or end up wasting sheets because you'll need a piece that's 32 or 48 3/4 long 2 times, and you can't get that out of one sheet. I hope that makes sense. So when you're starting, it's important to be thinking ahead of how your materials and your design and your structure are going to lay out so that as you go through the process, in this case, you put the wall framing on, you can see that the floor joists and the studs all line up. That's proper construction. And in an 8x8 shed, nothing's going to fall apart or cave in because you didn't line these things up accurately. But those layout principles are good, just good practice to build into your thinking as you move forward. I'm going to put the rafters on here while we're talking about layout. And the way all this works out is that now the rafters land over the studs and the studs land over the floor joists, and there's that seasickness effect. Sorry about that. And when we put the roof sheeting on, which I'll stick back on here, I think I put roof sheeting in the model. There it is. This, let's see what this sheet measures here. This sheet is 94 1/8, so that works out that I'm not wasting a sheet. And the reason I'm bringing that up is I determined early on, thinking through the project, that the most important layout factor was the seams of the plywood siding. So in a different configuration with a different overhang width or some other factor, if you went with 2-foot centers instead of 16-inch centers, you might end up with an inefficient use of roof sheathing because you might have to get more than to your cutoff. Say this cutoff on the end here, if this piece ended up, because of your shed design, if this piece ended up 48 or 49.5 inches, then you'd have waste on the roof sheathing because the layout was predetermined with the siding that I use the siding preference, the siding layout as a precedent for the layout. And if a person was using very expensive or particular roofing material, for instance, that came in 10-foot wide sheets, you might, some other material might take a precedent and set the layout so that you're not wasting the most important or the most expensive material. I hope that didn't get too involved for what it's worth. I'm going to go back to the floor layout here, and let's put the subfloor in. And you'll notice if I zoom in here, this is a full sheet of tongue and groove plywood, and different manufacturers of plywood or OSB, sometimes the 48-inch dimension is from the edge of the groove to the tip of the tongue, and sometimes it's to the face measures 48, and sometimes it's to the tip of the tongue on the plywood. And I'm assuming in this case that the face is 48 inches going either way. And let's see, I got a 47 3/4 there. There's the 48. So what that means is I'm assuming the plywood is 48 inches on the face and about 48 3/8 with the tongue. And for some reason my 3D mouse quit functioning here, so I'm going back to the scroll wheel. But what I'm showing here is that to get the plywood flush with the floor framing, I'm assuming that the tongue gets ripped off on the side so it doesn't interfere with the siding later on. So to accommodate the siding first and the subfloor second, I made this framing 8 feet wide or 96 inches as I'm showing here. And to get that, the floor joists are cut short here, which is 93 inches, and a couple of 1.5 inch rim joists give you the 98 inches that you're looking for. So those are the layout factors and considerations to get to this point in the shed. I think I'm going to stop the video here so I can get my 3D mouse functioning again, and I'll pick it up and talk about setting this base up to get it square before it's put together. So we'll come back for part 2, and we'll continue on with this shed project.